All right, guys, welcome back to the Clack Shack. And today, for those of you that watched the video the other night where I had both the lasers going, I didn't have a whole lot of content to put out there, so I just kind of sat there and waited on these things to burn and ran my head a little bit. But this is the, I've got some more video that I did the other night because I had intended on doing a video, but stuff came up, it didn't work out, so I'm gonna drop a little bit of video of how I got to this point. I'm gonna go ahead and plotch that in right here, and then I'm gonna cut over. So this is gonna be a pieced together video. So if you notice that it's pieced together, it definitely is pieced together because I didn't have time to do the video that I wanted to do the other day. Some things didn't work out. And so I'm gonna try to piece this thing to give you as much information about how I do these as is possible. So stick around for just a few minutes, and I'm gonna cut here for a minute and I'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome back to the Clack Shack, and tonight I'm going to be finishing on this piece of engraving here that I've got done on this mahogany. And what I did last night, for those of y'all that may have saw it, is I did a 3-pass burn, and I tried to get me a good recess on this piece of wood, because on this build I'm going to be doing a epoxy backfill on this part of it, and then I've got another logo that's going here and some text that's going to go there. But I want to do the epoxy first because I'm going to have to put the epoxy in, let that dry, then do some sanding, and I don't want to risk messing up my other engraves once I get this blue epoxy in there. I will be clear epoxy filling these designs as well. I'm going to try to recess them down too, but for this particular job here, I'm going to be using some of this Pacific blue powder, and I've got my epoxy. I went ahead and got a little ahead of the game here and got it mixed so that it wouldn't take quite as long. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to try to put this in here. I don't want to spill as much, much more as I can help, but if I spill a little bit, that's going to be okay, because I am going to have to sand this down and try to get it to where I can work with it. Oh, wait a minute there, baby. Everybody, Fluffy says, hey. Fluffy, you are going to have to go outside for this little deal, baby, because epoxy and cats don't mix. So Fluffy gets to stay outside tonight for a little while. And luckily I have built a little trap door here on the cat door so that it keeps Fluffy out, because I do have a cat door that they use, but I have a little trap door that I built to go over it. I'm going to need to get Fluffy's sawdust off of that. Tell you guys, it's a zoo. It's a zoo. All right, no more Fluffy dust. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using the same little shish kebab stick that I used to pick out the pieces of burnt wood last night. I'm going to be using that same stick to try to delicately place this epoxy in this hole without overlapping it a whole lot onto the rest of the surface. All right, guys, I managed to get the epoxy in the burn without making too much of a mess. I used the pigment. Like I said, this is Mayspring Pacific Blue is what it's called. I got it on Amazon, same as my epoxy. These are both tabletop epoxies. It's self-leveling. I've had some pretty good work with it. Some pretty good luck so far. I did a couple of these etchings like this. I did one large cedar top that had an etch similar to this in it that I did with just clear epoxy. And the stuff sets pretty hard and sets fast. So what I'll do is I'm going to put this back in my enclosure, of course, because I gotta cat proof it for tonight. And also, if there's any bugs or whatever that get in the shop, I don't want them to be ended up in my epoxy here. But what I'll do is I have tried to keep the bulk of the epoxy in the area that I want it. Now there's going to be some sanding required to get this you know, back to the way it needs to be. And then once I do that, once I get this sanded, I'll sand this down back to the wood to make sure I have all the epoxy removed. I'll finish the engrave here, and then I'm going to do the text here. And once I do that, I'm going to go back with a painted layer of epoxy over everything. That way it seals all the black, and it seals another layer over the top of the blue once that is done. So that's the plan with this piece. I think you can see it pretty well. Let me look in the camera and make sure. But it's not a bad looking thing. Like I said, epoxy's kind of a new thing to me. There you go. And that's a lake, guys, in case you're trying to figure out what that is. I know it kind of looks like a lightning strike, but it's a lake that's here in Alabama. It's called Lake Martin. It's one of the larger lakes in our area. All right, guys, and just to make sure that this thing doesn't end up with fluffy tracks in it, or Callie or Tiger or any of the other cats, I'm going to put it inside my enclosure for tonight. That'll also make sure it doesn't get a lot of dust on it, and hopefully no bugs. So I'm just going to let that sit in the enclosure overnight to dry so I can let the cats back in, because they get really upset if they're not allowed to come inside. So I'm going to turn the camera around. For those of you that don't know about it or didn't get to see it, I'm going to show you what I've got over here as far as the cat control mechanism that I built. All right, guys, that there is the cat gate. And like I said, everything in here has got sawdust and cobwebs on it. But that's my cat gate. And right behind the cat gate is the cat door. And I had to put this in because when I'm doing tables or whatever, these guys don't understand that they can't come in, and you see how Fluffy just bolts through that door. So you have to make sure to put that down if you want to control where Fluffy can go, because that's her little kitty door that she uses to come in and out of the clack shack. That also affords her a place to hang out where larger dogs, coyotes, or whatever can't get her. So just thought I'd share that with you for the Fluffy fans out there. All right, guys. As you saw in the previous clip, I had used a little bit of my epoxy. This is the remainder of it. Like I said, I kind of left in a rush, didn't clean up after myself. So I got me an epoxy popsicle now. But what I did is that deep burn that I did the other night, after I burned it, I used these little shish kebab sticks, and I'm gonna break the end off of this one because I also used it for my epoxy, so it's kind of hung up right now. But I used the sharp end of these little shish kebab sticks to kind of go in here and pick out the wood, because the point of this laser is so fine, it'll actually cut that stuff out, but the little pieces of strips of char will lay in there. And you can blow a lot of it out with the air hose, but for the most part, I have found that if you'll take something and just kind of scrape it a little bit, it scratches it out. This cut is probably close to 3 millimeters deep, and then I backfilled it with the epoxy, and that way I'll have that blue color in the wood, and then the rest of the graphics are going to be just black. I'm going to leave them black, and I'm going to fill those with clear epoxy. But I do want to go ahead and pick that as well when I do that to add that depth, so that you can tell when it's epoxied over that it's deeper. So now that I'm at this stage, the next thing that I'm going to be doing, let me move my jig out of the way. I take this off of my machine because of the size of this piece when I put it in there. But I didn't do a good job the other day of explaining how I did the process. This is the epoxy that I use, and all this is, guys, I'm going to be honest with you, this is the only epoxy I've ever used because I did some research. This was the first stuff that I bought, and I bought it, and I have used it, and it works good, so I don't see changing it. And it's Pro Marine Supplies. This is the hardener, and this is the tabletop epoxy. It's a 1-to-1 mix. So you'll notice that both of those jugs have exactly the same amount of epoxy left in them. The way I do it, I use solo cups because they're cheap. I got them laying around. and I used the little lines and stuff on the Solo cup as kind of measuring references, and I just mixed 2 parts together, stir it up really good, and get it put in there. Also, for this one, I used, this is Mayspring Pacific Blue pigment. Blue's really the only pigment I currently have. I want to get me a black. I would like to get a red because I do some firefighter stuff from time to time. But blue currently is the only pigment that I have here. But that stuff works pretty well. I usually put it in first and then pour the other 2 parts on top of it and stir everything together real good with a stick. But the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this down and get it to where I can do the other burns. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the video for a second. All right, for the first layer of this sanding operation, I'm going to be running 120 grit. Since I've already got the epoxy on there, I don't want to go too coarse because I don't want to scar up my epoxy and then have to take a lot of material off of it to try to fix it back. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to use this 120 just to get the wood down to where I want it with the epoxy, and then I'm going to go over it with like some 300 grit to shine things back up.
I don't want to go messing with my epoxy a whole lot. Like I said, if you've ever messed with epoxy, you know that as it dries, it kind of settles in a little bit. And so I'm trying to just stay on the surface of the wood. And some of these places are really faint in the epoxy, so I don't want to go take out too much material. So I've got the whole board. I went over it because when I tried to put this in real carefully, but guys, it just doesn't work with epoxy. I wound up having to just pour it in and use the little piece of wood basically as like a squeegee to get it in the holes. And so once I get that part done, I'm just going to come back in here, just get the dust off of it. And I'm going to go back with a little more less aggressive sandpaper here. This is 400 grit. This isn't going to do a whole lot of taking material off. This is just going to kind of smooth things back up for my next engrave. And so I'm just going to hit it with a 400 it's pretty smooth. Like I said, the 120 is not too aggressive, but I'm going to go back and slick it down a little bit more with this final sandpaper.
All right. And that's got me about where I want to put that. So I'm going to hit it with the air again just to get any kind of powder or dust off of it, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to take the camera and turn this thing around and kind of show you what it looks like. So let me kind of scotch it up so you can get the true effect of this stuff here. But it turned out pretty well. Like I said, I'm pleased with it. Still got a long way to go on this build, but there's the man. I tell you, if I can get this thing to focus, there's what the engrave looks like currently. It's a deep engrave. Like I said, it's still got a little bit of a recess in the centers, but I'm kind of trying to go for. I kind of want to go for that look. So that's where I want this to be. And now it's going to go back in and get the next design added to it. Alrighty guys, well for the next phase of this, it's going to have to go back in the XTool. And I had to do a little bit of cutting in between the jobs, so I've got to reconfigure my XTool for this thick of a piece of wood. The piece I had in here cutting was substantially much thinner, so I didn't need my legs on it. But for the next phase of this, we're going to have to take the D1 here. And for those of you that have talked about my design for my enclosure, let me show you this, guys. This is why I like my design right here. All right, I'm having to put the leg extensions back on my machine. But instead of having to pull it completely out of the enclosure, all I got to do is flip it up like that. I keep my little leg extensions inside my enclosure. There's enough room that it can stand up and it's not in the way. It's not out here in the open. and I can just add my leg extensions back to it without having to remove it completely and take my air assist off. So I'm just going to be adding one leg extension to each leg because the thickness of this material, that's really all I got to have. Just need a little more room under the laser head. This piece of wood I'm working with still a good close to 2 inches thick. And so then all I've got to do is swing the machine back around, make sure my back feet drop down into my honeycomb holders, drop the front feet down in it, and with all of my jigging apparatuses in place, you'll notice that the machine does not move. And that is what I like about my enclosure. That is what I like about all my jig tools and stuff that I build, is it makes sure everything is exactly where I need it to be every time. So now that that's back in there, I'm gonna have to plug my power and all back up because I do have to unplug it. If you're building an enclosure similar to this one, one thing that I wouldn't mind going back and doing a little different is add about another 1.5 inches or 2 inches to your left to right so that you have a little more room for your plugs, because I actually had to put, this is where my air goes into the enclosure, and reason is because that's where my wires go in as well, and I had to have a hole to be able to put my cables on there when it goes up and down. So the way that this thing is oriented in my program, I've got to have it facing this direction. So I'm going to drop that in there. And since this thing is so big and there's really not a whole lot of ways of getting it exactly where it needs to be, to square it up, I'm more or less going to be using the honeycomb. I'm just lining the edge of this thing up with the edge of the honeycomb right here. And then I've got these little guys here that I made, and these are just my little fences that fall down in the honeycomb here. I just drop those down into the gaps, the holes of the honeycomb, and those little fences gives it something to where when I slide it back, it rests up against those little fences, and that doesn't let it move. And I've also got like little holes for toothpicks in them too, because when I'm cutting leather, you know how leather likes to curl. I can actually take these toothpicks and put in these holes, and I can use these guys to hold my leather flat. So that's what I use these little guys here for. And they work pretty well. They're a little brittle, they break easily, but the cool part about them is every one of them is made from scrap wood that I had no room to do anything else on. And now that I've got my little fences in place, this board doesn't slide on the honeycomb. So, I mean, if you hit it with a hammer, I'm guessing it would probably go somewhere, but it's liable to break my honeycomb. So now that I've got that in there, I'm gonna go ahead and close this, and I'm gonna use the camera because I've already did my centering when I first put the lake on there. So now I'm gonna use my camera along with framing to take a picture of this thing and then line my graphic up to place the remaining part of the graphics, because now that I've got that lake on there, I can use the camera and that lake to orient everything. And it is getting hot in here, guys, so I'm gonna go cut the fan on. So that's gonna be my next step, is I'm gonna go ahead and use the camera in conjunction with the frame option and get this guy lined up. So I'm just gonna open up that graphic that I designed for this and do that right quick. And give me just a minute and I'll be back with you. All right, guys, I'm having one of those nights where things ain't wanting to cooperate entirely. I had to take the piece out from the original way that I put it in there, left and right, but because of the width of this piece of wood, I found that I had an issue with my cables trying to catch on the corner as it came forward. Luckily, I caught that during the final framing, and so I've had to take it out and rotate it 90 degrees. I had to rotate my artwork 90 degrees to match it, and I've got it set up, and I'm letting it burn the way I wanted it to burn. One thing that I will take opportunity to mention to you while this is going I've had a couple of followers and a couple of my folks that watch the channel that mentioned to check on the offset feel. They said that offset feel had made some time differences in some of the burns that they had done. And so with this graphic, I took the opportunity while I was setting it up and checking my times and deciding whether I wanted to do flood feel or just a standard, you know, feel. And I put the offset feel in there. The one thing that I did see, and I didn't like it for this design, some designs it might be okay, but it had some kind of sporadic, the way the laser was working in and the burn lines, it was very sporadic. And with this design, I just didn't feel like that was a look that I wanted to go with. I wanted more of a straight defined line throughout the whole engrave. I may play with that on some lesser important projects where it's not a big hunk of mahogany wood that potentially I could have to start all over. I may play with that a little on some of those, but for now I'm running this one with the classic burn setup. The flood feel, it made it a little faster, but it really wasn't enough for me to be willing to change the look, the appearance of the lines for the feel. And for those of you that don't know, if you'll go to preview when you're getting ready to do a graphic and zoom on the preview, zoom way in, you can actually see those little tiny lines where the laser is going to go back and forth. And sometimes those lines are going to be visible in your burns, and if you're not careful, especially with, you know, metals and things like that where they'll be really noticeable, it can affect the end look of the graphic. So something to consider is when you're doing that and you're trying to determine which cut setting you want to go with, sometimes time is not the only concern. You also want to still have the look that you're going for. So when you're trying the flood feel and you're trying the offset and you're trying just a standard, you know, feel, go ahead and zoom in and look at those scratch lines that laser is going to make sure that that's a look that you're good with. A lot of times you can't make them out depending on the material, but sometimes you can. And so I would hate to, you know, change my settings, do a burn, especially on something that you can't replace, or you would have to replace it completely, and then find out after it was over with that it actually didn't come out with the appearance and the look that you were going for. So we'll mark that down as a tip for today. But I've got the big logo going on here, and I really, to be honest with you guys, I'm a little nervous that if I show this thing, there's some pretty specific designs and pretty specific logos that are going on this piece now. And just out of respect for the customer and the fact that this is supposed to be a surprise gift, the chances of somebody seeing it on my channel and it being for them, I don't think is that great, but it could happen. And so I'm gonna have to refrain from showing you the detail on this one. I will, however, try to take some pictures of it, and once it has been presented to that person, I may even take a couple of video clips of it, and once it's been presented to that person, then I can go back and share it. But that's about it. I will come up here and kind of show you what I got going on now, because it hasn't gotten all the way across that logo. But I think I'm going to go ahead and, on this particular build, because of the nature of it, I think I'm going to call it a wrap after this, and not go any further, because I'm really afraid this guy's going to find out, and it's, you know, it's going to be on me. So give me just a second. I'm going to bring the camera around and just show you this big block of mahogany and how my machine's over here getting it done, and I'm gonna wrap that up. And there you go, guys. Got it going in on the other side of the lake design, and it's coming out pretty good. Like I said, I went for the straight up, just standard feel on this one. I was afraid to get too crazy with the burn lines. And once that gets through, I'm going to clean that up real good, hit it with a little sandpaper, and then drop the text on it next. So I'm just doing this one step at a time. One reason is because this thing is so massive that if I'm not careful and if I don't position it properly, the XTool could hit one of its outer boundaries and mess this engrave up. And that's a big block of mahogany for me to be trying to replace, or either having to plane it down again and start completely over. So trying to avoid that. All right, guys, just gonna let y'all know, for the ones of you that keep up with the mill, or maybe you heard me tell you the other day that my mill tore up on me. Luckily, my friends at Wood-Mizer have came through, and I've got not one, but 2 sets of belts for my mill. I went ahead, they had them in stock. They weren't all that expensive for what, for the money that I make with the mill and the money that I save myself with the mill. So I went ahead and got me 2 sets of belts. And like I said, that way I've got a set to replace the ones on it now that are worn. And I'll have a secondary set in the event that something happens to one of those. I am notorious for having extra parts for things. And as y'all know, the way supply chains sometimes can be, or being able to get to things, I like to have extras. So if my mill breaks down on a Sunday morning or something, I don't have to worry about not being able to get a belt. I've already got a backup. And then once I use that one, I'll replace it. And another package came today. And guys, this is a unique packaging approach that they took here, but I guess it works. It almost looks like a shoe, but I had a company that reached out to me, and they make an air assist and an enclosure. The air assist is really close as far as appearance wise. It looks a lot like the XTool air assist, and they even market this thing as being for the XTool. From what I've seen on the internet and what I saw on some of the advertisements that they have for it, it comes with a lot of like hoses and connectors and stuff like that. And I got also more news from the shipping world around the Clack Shack. I got notification that my 20-watt Pro should be here August the 3rd. So hopefully that will give me, once my 20-watt gets here, my plan is the 20 watts going to it's going to live. Okay, I don't know where that word came from, but it's going to be in the enclosure, the 20 watt wheel, and then I'm going to do something else with the 10 watt over here. I'm probably going to make use of either this enclosure or maybe the one that I got here now. I don't know yet. I haven't gotten this out and looked at it to see, how big it is or how I like it. I'm going to save this for a day, probably this weekend where I've got plenty of time. I'm going to open these boxes, check out what's inside, and maybe put them through the paces and see what they're about. But this is an air assist that is supposed to be, according to them, very comparable to the XTool air assist and a enclosure. And I'm guessing from the packaging and the weight of it, I'm guessing it's going to be a similar design to the other enclosure, and that it's going to be some type of fabric material with maybe a plastic or metal PVC type support structure. But I'm going to save that for this weekend because I got more good news. Is that last night I was actually able to get all my grass cut before the afternoon thunderstorms got here. And so my Saturday mornings, which are usually filled with grass cutting, are going to be open. So hopefully Saturday morning I'll be able to get out here and get this stuff out and test it. I've still got a couple more engraves I got to do to get caught up on some of my random engraves and test this stuff and maybe try to get a video out there. But so mark it on your calendar, guys. After August the 3rd, I will have my 20 watt XTool D1 Pro. Hopefully, if nothing happens with the UPS truck, it'll be here the 3rd. And so shortly after the 3rd, we're going to start really putting that Pro through the paces. So if you haven't already, guys, please subscribe. And the ones of you that may know May, I kind of crashed the party on her today on one of her lives. And she sent a lot of people over to comment and that type of thing. But I appreciate the ones of you that participated in my payback from the Clack Shack to May. And feel free to continue to do that if you want to. It's kind of hilarious to hear her talk about it. But that's what we got coming in the future, guys. So this weekend, I'm going to be trying this stuff out and seeing what it's about. And then on the 3rd, hopefully, if all goes well and the UPS driver doesn't get mad at me, hopefully the Pro will be here and we're gonna do some testing, guys. I've already got some wood picked out. I've got oak, I've got maple, I've got poplar, I got pine, and I'm gonna test this 20 watt and see if it'll actually do what everybody's trying to say that it'll do on the internet. And that's assuming I don't have firmware issues. So we'll see. But thanks for stopping by, guys. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button down below. See ya.